it comes to all things UFO and alien, I can't think of an event more defining in the history books than Roswell. Sure, there have been plenty of other credible events, but even if you ask a non-believer, hey, what happened at Roswell, they'll have an opinion and knowledge about what they think went down. So, question for you, what do you think happened there? Personally, I'm sure you've guessed, I'm on Team Aliens. So let me know your answer in the comments, and let's see if I can't convince the non-believers today. Maybe. For starters, let's cover some of the lesser known info about the sites. So there wasn't just one crash. Turns out there was two. And the second crash was about 40 miles away from the original ranch. Don't worry, I'll chat about the original ranch later. But this was where more wreckage and alien bodies were discovered. A firefighter who responded to the second scene recalled seeing a large desk in the ground with several small, non-human bodies nearby. Military officials on the scene pressured the firefighter to keep quiet about what he saw, because that's how things get covered up. Sergeant Melvin Brown was on site during the mission to recover the debris and was told not to look under tarps, but his curiosity got the best of him. Who wouldn't it? It's like, I wonder. When he peeked, he saw two alien bodies. Now, the government has obviously always denied his claims, but he's far from being the only person to say they saw extraterrestrial beings recovered from Roswell. Years later, his daughter, Beverly Bean, claimed he told her and her family that he pulled those bodies and transported them to a secret government facility. He didn't say which one. I'm gonna guess Area 51, and not just because it rhymes. Former CIA agent Oscar Wayne Wolf claims he saw both living aliens, retrieved parts, and remains of alien ships throughout his career. And he made these shocking claims about the infamous Area 51, saying he saw a spacecraft and a living alien there. At the time, I think he was 77 years old, and he was speaking to UFO researcher Richard Dolan, but he was a little worried about giving up his true identity, so he was going by the anonymous, but we now know his real name. After the agent made his claim, it was then shared at the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure held at the National Press Club in Washington in 2013. The agent was understood to have used a fake name throughout his career in the CIA, so the chances of his real name having been used in an account were never high. He worked for the CIA between 1957 and 1960, where he spent time in a military base in the southeast US where they analyzed physical evidence. Now, why did he come forward in 2013? He's like, I'm about to die. What's gonna happen? The government's gonna kill me? So he came forward for a conversation, chatting with Richard Dolan. And this is where he was like, okay, I went to Area 51. Why? To look at items allegedly found and retrieved by the government. And what was among these items? A flying saucer that crashed and landed in July of 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico. And also at Area 51, live aliens. Technically, this was all in the S4 facility, by the way. In his statement, he described seeing different saucer crafts, by the way. But the first one was the Roswell craft. That was the most important one, and it was kind of crashed up. And also, apparently, every alien that was in it passed away, except for like one or two. Also, the craft was really strange because it looked like really heavy aluminum foil. We'll get back to that. So he also viewed an autopsy film where the colonel on screen said, what we've got here, we're interviewing a gray alien. Now, the anonymous had no idea he was gonna see the film, saying the alien didn't look human as far as the skin tone and basically the shape of it and the size of its head compared to a normal human. Now, after all this, he was warned by the CIA. No talking. Like, he did this public statement, and even then, the guy's 77 and the CIA is like, you shut up. So, if you never see me again, whoopsies. In 2023, which was like 76 years after the original incident, two new pieces of physical evidence were recovered from the debris field of the crash site. Researchers Chuck Zukowski and Frank Kimbler were responsible for the findings and the new discourse, by the way. Chuck explained in an interview with the Roswell Daily Record that he was there working on a YouTube documentary. He's like, I want to go, they're going to interview Frank at this UFO museum, and I want to go to the debris site, just because, like, let's go get some drone footage, see what we can find. He wanted to get some pictures for his lecture, and just, while I'm there, let's get out the good old Geiger counter, metal detector, see what we can find. And during the visit to the debris field, the camera equipment was having some problems. And, like, weird problems, not the usual, like, dead battery. It was more like dying too fast. So, Chuck went back to his vehicle, grabbed his EMF meter, and while he was scanning, the meter was spiking. Frank noticed it right away and was like, hey, what's going on here? It's like, that should not be happening. That is not normal. Now, Kimbler, by the way, is an associate professor of earth science at the New Mexico Military Institute and a professional geologist, and he's the one who brought the metal detector and was like, okay. So the guys dug down about 6 to 8 inches into the ground and they found this little piece of metal. And then a couple minutes later, they got another hit. And what do you know? Another piece of metal. Thankfully, they dug those up and it's like, what do we have here? So they brought it for analysis at the Colorado Metallurgical Services in Aurora, and according to the test results, aluminum emerged as the predominant element. But there was an intriguing blend of additional elements, including silicon, magnesium, manganese, iron, copper, zinc, chromium, nickel, and cobalt. All sides of the debris were showing jagged and torn edges, which is highly uncommon for this little object. It was about like a quarter of an inch. The damage led experts to assume that the origin of this particular debris could be attributed to a forceful and high energy explosive event. But the machine only said it was very, very similar to what's called a 6000 series aluminum alloy. That doesn't mean that's what it is. It's just the best guess. Now, the interesting thing about these alloys is, I did some research, it's not normal for people to make them in thin sheets, like authentic sheets, stuff like that's paper thin. This stuff is normally used for construction work, for building bridges, making big structures. But it makes sense for a UFO, especially when you consider the aluminum foil-like stuff that Oscar saw at Area 51. Follow the bouncing ball here, folks. In 1995, Ray Santinelli, a London-based entrepreneur, released footage of an alien autopsy performed at Roswell in 1947. Now, experts were like, okay, it's a hoax. And years later, he was like, okay, maybe this footage wasn't real. But he insisted real footage existed. Now, we already kind of knew this, but he's just adding to that. He said that in 1993 or 1994, he saw the footage of the autopsy in its original form and brought it back to the UK. Now, within that year or so, the footage had deteriorated and there was only a few frames left. So what he did, he wanted to restore it, frame by frame by frame, to get it out into the world so people could know what was going on. And look, we just had somebody say, we saw footage of an alien autopsy at Area 51 from Roswell. So seeing as most things that have to do with Area 51 or Roswell have been redacted, destroyed, or heavily censored, I kind of believe this. And finally, what would today be without the original ranch story? So, Mac, he found wreckage on his property in Lincoln County sometime between mid-June to early July. And what was it? Well, he was like, it looks like rubber strips, tinfoil, and thick paper. Once again, bringing me back to the aluminum foil thing. So the range didn't have any phone or radio at the time, and he didn't really know what was going on with flying saucers. So he was like, okay, let's just hide this under some bush until I can figure out what to do with it. Because, he was rational. Now, on July 5th, he drove into Corona, and that's where he was like, oh, something's going on with flying saucers. And he was thinking, and a couple days later, he brought the wreckage with him to the sheriff's office to see what they could do. The sheriff, smart man, brought in the Roswell Army Airfield, which then assigned the matter to Major Jesse Marcel. Mac brought Major Marcel back to the debris site, and they gathered up more pieces of the rubber in the tin foil, and the Major brought the materials home. Fast forward next day, July 8th, Public Information Officer for the Roswell Army, Walter Haut, issued a press release stating that personnel from the field's 509th Operations Group had recovered a flying disc. On that same day, the Major brought the material to his base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, who reported the findings to General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth Army Airfield, or FWAAF for short. General Ramey ordered that the material be flown to Fort Worth immediately. So Marcel was like, all right, hopping on a plane. As soon as he brought the materials to General Ramey's office, both Ramey and his chief of staff, Colonel Thomas Dubose, were like, it's a weather balloon kite. The weather officer on duty was like, it's a device, we use it. It's man-made, no biggie. Apparently, these balloons were attached to a 6-pointed reflective device that looked like a silver star. And after launch, the balloon would expand with increasing altitude before bursting around 60,000 feet. So, in theory, sure, it makes sense. After the initial newspaper reports of 1947, the incident kind of faded away from public attention for like 30 years until the 70s. Which brings us to February of 1978, when UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed Major Marcel. And his statements contradicted the ones he made to the press in 1947. People were like, okay, come on, comment. And he's like, I'm not at liberty. All he could do was keep his mouth shut. And General Ramey was the one who discussed. He was the one who talked to the papers, the newsmen. And he was like, shh, it's just a weather balloon. Shush. Now, they both knew differently. Well, the statement wasn't elaborated on. He's like, can't say anything. After United States congressional inquiries, the General Accounting Office launched their own inquiry and directed the Office of the United States Secretary of the Air Force to conduct an internal investigation. And what do you know? Press release, 1994. The material recovered was likely, keyword here, debris from Project Mogul, a military surveillance program employing high-altitude balloons in classified portions of an unclassified New York University project. So, wait a minute, which story's right? Hey, US government. A scholarly consensus emerged concluding that the military was like, we're gonna hide things up, because apparently this was nuclear test monitoring and they didn't want to freak anybody out. Apparently this balloon had been launched from a different airfield a month earlier and it was classified. So we're gonna test everything, but shh, don't tell anybody, so they made up the other story. The Air Force reports were dismissed by experts as either being disinformation or simply implausible. Just look, the scary part about all of this for me is counting how many times the government has changed their tale, expecting the general public to believe them. At the end of the day, if you look at everything I've said today, certain things match up and certain things make sense. And that's it for me, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident ooky spooky girly, and if you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you weren't already, hit the bell for more Roswell chatter from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see you all next time, you lovely spooky people.